Yeah.
I was downtown.
You know, I actually didn't think it was as busy as previous years. Maybe it was the weather.
Yeah.
You know, my husband went to the drum show. Am I on the microphone? Is the microphone taking?
No.
Hey, everybody. I started the recording. Just heads up.
Such a close person.
Too much.
I don't know. I think it's fine.
Did you do a test run on your sharing earlier?
I was just opening my presentation. I didn't test run the sharing though.
Is it in here?
Yeah, well, it's open.
Oh. Gotcha.
Yes, sir. Make sure everything, nothing in between, smile. Powder up.
Okay, I appreciate this when I get the sides. Are you on?
This way though, you can look at it straight in the eye. It's like you're talking to everyone.
How do I do like slides from over there? Is that-
It's, you'll just grab, when you're,
Hello. Hello. Hi. Hi. So what did the boys think of the drone show?
They're actually in Palm Springs with their dad.
Oh, so they didn't go.
They didn't go, but I went with
Keyboard.
a bunch of
I
other.
don't think I need it.
Well, yeah, the biggest thing was everyone thought it was too short because compared to like a normal fireworks show,
Yeah.
it's shorter, but that was the main feedback I heard. But it was super cool, I thought.
The story of the deer getting on the site.
I know,
A few minutes before.
I know.
Here we go.
Are you ready now?
I think so.
I'm totally dressed
Just
up.
running around like a crazy person. Like all of us, I think. Packing it all in, you know what I mean? Yep. Busy times. Summer. Did you get away with your camera for the fourth?
No, we were here, we had visited our old neighbors from Dallas.
Oh,
Stayed with us.
well, that's nice.
Yeah,
Did they go to the Lyle Lovett concert?
they did not. That was their last, they left.
Did anyone
early
go
this
to
morning.
that? Did you like it?
Yeah,
Was it
pretty
good?
entertaining. I liked like the last third of it the best.
Did you guys like? Good for you. Was it, how about the environment?
I thought it was a really nice, we were up, well, we weren't up front, we were in row U, so we had seats.
That's
But
cool.
Erin said she got front row or second row. She ordered up the minute.
They
went
came
online.
available.
We were row N, which was perfect.
Was it?
Yeah, we were in the middle. It was awesome.
It was pretty, huh?
He's
Nice.
a little hard to understand,
Uh-huh.
but when the other people were singing, you could understand what they were saying. But
Super
the
cool.
band was stunning. The really too bad thing was, it was his large band. He has 15 members in the large band. 8 of them were in the back of the organ. So
Yeah,
his
the
entire
brass.
horn section
Oh.
was, so, you know, you
What a
have to think
bummer.
about how did they have to change the music
Oh, I
to
bet.
present it? Oh my God, they did a great job. It was, great.
And, well attended.
yeah,
Sold out.
it was weird though. The row in front of us was empty and the row
Yeah.
behind us was empty, but everybody
Well,
else.
I saw Tammy Graham in the grocery store, and she said she thought they might have 500 walk-ins that night,
Yeah.
because people were waiting. to
See what the
was
weather,
like.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
for sure,
Perfect
yeah.
weather.
So they must have had, and they kept advertising it and advertising it, so I didn't think it was sold out.
Yeah. I had to like go on Spotify and I was like, I don't think I'd never
I
heard.
didn't know his music.
I'm like, I love it. That's who married Julie Roberts.
That's why we went.
That's how I know him.
We're like, who me? I didn't think Julia Roberts, yeah, he's got it.
I know, literally.
But truly, I didn't know a song.
Yeah, but it's still fun.
We all
Like
get
music
this.
is so fun.
You know, I wanted to support them.
McDonald's.
Okay, it is
Yeah,
2:15.
I got one, I was gonna copy it.
Has anyone gotten an
But I
enoemail
keep
from,
forgetting. So,
Olivia?
good. Now I know
I
you
have
have it.
not.
Let me just check and see if I have a text. Grab water real quick. Yeah, I have no text. Okay. Give it one more minute because my phone is different from that.
Here he comes.
Perfect. Everyone is here. Recovered from 4th of July weekend. Perfect. So I will now open this meeting. It is 2:15, good. And this is the July 5th study session. Start by saying Barb Noseworthy, Mayor, and I'm gonna go around and have the roll call. So, Babe, since you're here, will you do a roll call for us?
Counselor Baxter,
Present.
Counselor Bosman's,
Present.
Counselor Buell,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Youssef,
Here.
and Mayor Noseworthy.
Present, thank you. And as we go into this meeting, I'm gonna, as I have done in the past, do my own personal land acknowledgement. And I want to always remind folks that this is my view as something I'm expressing and does not represent the opinion or consensus of the council. But for thousands of years, this region was home to numerous people, bands, tribes, and nations. Each had their distinct culture, artistic expression, and community mores. In particular, this region was the ancestral home of the Nuchu, Dene, Pueblo, Hopi, Sinome, multiple Apache bands, and various other tribes and Latinx people who used and stewarded this land. I recognize that indigenous people were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands by the US government, and it is important to recognize that the narrative of this region has mostly been told from the dominant perspective, without recognition of those who came before us and who to this day continue to thrive, create, and connect with this land. Thank you for your respect and acknowledging this legacy. Thank you. So we have a couple of items to cover, starting with, and I just want to make certain, we have a proposed agenda that will allow for a break from 3:35 to 3:45. That assumes we all stay within the time frame. So if we go over because of questioning and whatnot, recognizing that would cut short that break. And then we are hoping to end at 4:45. And Dirk, you're also on the schedule for the very last presentation, correct? Okay. So on that, is there some future new business and review of agendas? And while we're thinking about that, can I point out the 7:19 agenda, just to make certain you have that and look at it, noting that we will start at 1:15 p.m. that day. We agreed to add that time because of the lodger's tax discussion. That was at a previous meeting. We reached that consensus. So, yeah, so I want to make certain everyone's aware of that. And then can you look at, just be a chance to look at that agenda. Mostly it is the lodger's tax discussion, budget and strategic plan, and then the recommendation or discussion regarding boards and commission structure, along with future new business. On that, does anyone have some new business items to discuss?
So, yeah, I do. I'm wondering if we would like to get an update on the Navigation Center, what it's doing, how it's doing it, how we can support it, or how it's fitting in with the Athena plan, what the expectations were about it and around it. Particularly as we head into this time of Purple Cliffs closing down, and I think the Navigation Center is going to be needed even more. So I would love to get an update personally on how that's going. And
I know we had one for when they first opened from Ann came or was on Zoom actually. And then would it be appropriate maybe in those meetings that we're doing with centered around that, as that is brought up then, or how, what do you think?
Yeah, can I also, I recognize the idea, you know, I was looking at the schedule, and I'm gonna punt to Jose just for a minute. You've got a schedule of what you want us, what we've agreed that we thought we needed to talk about. And I recognize that we make an agreement months ago, and so things can change, and we need to have that flexibility. In the past, we had looked at those schedules and then kind of ranked them as a council. Okay, given the dynamics of how things change, this is going to be more important than something else. I'm wondering, while I see the merit of that, I also wanted to see how that fit in with what we had, and were there things that we as a council thought we could move, or are we just adding more time to meetings?
So, yeah, I think we need to send out that link to the council for sure, kind of work on that. It's a link we constantly modify within staff, or just things that we have up for future items. Specifically, just as we're getting in here with new business items, to make sure that we are balancing them correctly with where you would want them to be in timing. I
Yeah.
think we've gotten a little sidestepped at a couple items that we missed on timing wise, just not knowing the expectation of it. I think we need to be able to provide you a little bit better up-to-date information at these meetings. So starting between now and the next study session, we'll be sending that link out to the council of kind of here's what we have planned for study session items throughout the year, and then be able to make some decisions based on that of it. So I think for my standpoint on that, that's just something I think we need to do a little bit better for staff to give you a bit more of a perspective of some of the items there, because I know the past couple meetings, we've missed a couple things and they've slipped through the cracks. So we're going to be able to provide that to the council starting after this meeting and getting that to you.
What about an accounting meeting? It's like a city county meeting. Would that be appropriate? Since we're working on it together,
That
or
could be,
propose it.
well, we have a meeting on the 29th, I think it is, with the city and the
Is it
county.
28th?
So is that something as well that
28th,
could be
I
useful?
think.
Absolutely. I think it would be a good idea for both the county and the city to know where we are with that, because that may be something that, given the situation with Purple Cliffs and other things, we might have to beef up, or we might have to, or maybe they're in perfect shape and we know all of that.
So a proposed agenda item for they'll be running that meeting, I believe.
I can get that
The
to
term, so that's
Chuck.
one of the proposed agenda
after this
items.
meeting. Yes.
Is there consensus around that?
It's on July 29th?
Correct, yeah.
That's a Friday.
believe
It's a
it's
Thursday,
28th.
28th, sometime in the afternoon.
Yeah, 2 PM to 4 PM. Right, yeah,
Okay, all right, so
Excellent.
that takes care. So then on this proposed study sessions, you're gonna get it to us before the 19th, the link.
Mhm.
And then I'm just asking council, in a sense, are we gonna look through those and say, these are my top priority? In the past, that's what we did independently. We sent in our top kind of pressing issues or top priorities. And then staff compiled those and said, here's where we're seeing consensus on these. But maybe we don't have consensus, but we need to discuss it as well. So what are you proposing as a way of ranking and prioritizing?
I think the schedule part is just to give council the understanding of knowing where we're at and what we think are some of those items. And then also to help, so if there's a new item coming on, or maybe even as you look at those and say, this was a priority, but there's probably some other things that have fallen on our laps this past couple of months that we might want to move up. So really is more of an ability to have some of that dialogue. So when new items are brought up, it can kind of help us talk with where I'd like to see it maybe in the August meeting. And I don't think we really need to talk at the August meeting about this subject, and just kind of help us plan out a little bit better so that we're putting things on the agenda, study session agendas that are pertinent and
Perfect.
important at the critical times for the council.
So would it make,
Maybe a 15-minute time on another study session to discuss study session.
I don't know if we have to go
No.
that far. I think it's just, here's where we're at. And if there's items on there that, as you look at future agendas, that I don't think we need to discuss this item, you could, and rather have this part of discussion. I think it just helps us have a better discussion, more informed in the first 30 minutes of how we want to move over some of the items that we're talking about.
so what I might propose, just kind of a combination of those two items, is maybe at the 19th meeting, as we open it up for new business, we'll start by saying, everyone reviewed the schedule. Are there any thoughts? Just so that if people have some thoughts, we don't have to,
Sure.
but it'll be the first item on that agenda is just an acknowledgement that we've received it, we've looked at it, and to see if there's any thoughts on the prioritization. Does that work for everybody? Is that a consensus all around?
Yes.
Thank you. Other items?
I have one other. So last week I rode my bike on the ART going south, and there are people already moving from Purple Cliffs into the city, anticipating the closure of Purple Cliffs. There was one guy, I really wanted his wagon. It was really nice. It was filled with all of the stuff. No, I didn't want the stuff. I wanted the wagon. And I think that we really, really need to be in front of what's happening. So I would love to have us have a discussion about how do we handle the fact that we will be having people moving into the city and either doing the overnight camping in the open space and or just wherever they darn well please in town. When I went under the 9th Street Bridge on the ART, there were 9 gentlemen hanging out there who were not acting very gentlemanly, particularly to the women who were passing underneath the 9th Street Bridge. So I'd like to propose that we, whether staff does this and brings it to council, which may be the best thing to do, I don't know how that works, but The idea that we have designated overnight campsites, people have to register, because if we did that, then we could actually put in a no camping ban in our open space, get the people out of the open space into the places where they're allowed to camp, and then we can manage that. So their caseworkers or the person who's offering them a job or someone who has a house for them knows where they are and can find them and take care of them. I'm really, really concerned, particularly after what I saw last week, about I think what's happening is that people know Purple Cliffs is closing, so they're staking their claim on their favorite place in town before everybody else gets there. And it's kind of a race to find my best sleeping spot. So I'm very concerned about that. And I'd love either for council to have a study session about it or for staff to come up with ways that we might address that so that we're ahead of it instead of following it.
I do think it's important that if we're asking staff for their feedback, that it not be prescriptive. In the sense of, this is what you want, we want you to tell us. In the sense that we're not necessarily telling them what and how to do it, and they're coming back with just where. I think we have to get a sense of what their recommendation is, open-ended. That's just my first response. Go ahead.
Just my first response is, as I hear what you're suggesting, Councilor Baxter, which I appreciate. And I hear the concern. I think it's valid. I've been wanting to also bring up to council, and I think this is a good time to bring it up as well, on a similar note, and to what both of you are actually suggesting is, we had the joint meeting with the Board of County Commissioners. We kind of gave some direction there, but that meeting made me feel like we need more time together as a council to talk about some of these issues. Mm-hmm. And while you're suggesting, you're just throwing it out there, should it be staff, should it be council? I appreciate that, but also I think that we need to talk about a few things, and some of the things that come to my mind, as you bring up a very good point right here. And also one of the things that comes up to my mind is, there's been discussions of managed camp. I think all of us, we might have 5 different descriptions of what a managed camp means and where, and if at all, and so I think before we head into these joint meetings with the Board of County Commissioners, I feel like it would be really helpful to know where we stand as a council, at least in a majority way. And clearly, I'm sure we probably won't all agree, but I think that if we go into those meetings prepared, where we know where the majority of council stands and has agreed to on certain issues, then that will potentially make us more productive as a group. So
I agree with you.
I don't know
Can
how we
build
do
on
that.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, it's interesting because I raised it, I had my one-on-one say just before this meeting, and I kind of asked him that, particularly with the proposed working group, which, believe me, if anybody else wanted to join it, it's not limited. We had 2 counselors before. How best to involve, keep everybody informed and get the opinions. And one of the things that Jose suggested as a start was that he added to his updates on, here's kind of an update of where we're going with the working group. That would be at the 2 meetings. And then if we needed to call a special session of this group to discuss things, make certain there's consensus, particularly through the course of the summer as we're working to address this, then putting it out to, with the council, be amenable to, as needed, having special sessions. Or again, that works into prioritizing what we do over the course of the summer.
Right.
So how to handle that so that we're cognizant and judicious with people's time, but also informing everyone. So,
to your point, Melissa, I think that to inform you in your conversations with the group, I think you kind of need to know what council's thinking. And if we wait until you've had 2 meetings with the group for you then to come to get council's input, it might be going in a different direction. So I do appreciate exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm struggling a little bit just because I think the closure of Purple Cliffs is obviously making us try to make decisions that maybe we haven't talked about, and so we're rushing a little bit because and I don't know if Olivier feels the same way, like we haven't really been super involved in any, like, what was our strategy before Purple Cliffs? How, we weren't involved with any of that. And so I would love to get, Chief Bramer's opinion on, how he wants to go forward with enforcement and where, like, plans. I'd like to get staff's opinion on their recommendations. Do other cities have managed camps within city limits? Are they all in county? How close are they? What transportation do they provide? Like, I would like to know, and I'm sure it's all been done, and I know maybe not, or talked about or whatever, but those are the things, like, I'm uncomfortable saying that. Like, I feel like you're being very prescriptive a little bit like, we need to have this location here so we can put them there. I'm not saying that, like, that's wrong or right, but I just don't know what I want to recommend even. So to sit down and have a study session where you can figure out council's thoughts, I don't know what my thoughts
Maybe
are.
that's part of the study session.
Right, and so, but also, this group is making decisions, and they're gonna come forward with
They're
that.
no, not making decisions.
Well,
They're only raising questions
raising
and then
questions and
sharing it
trying-
with council
But
and trying to figure out what's the best.
are
way
we
to-
spending money on a consultant? Is she gonna bring forward decisions? Are we
Yeah,
gonna
see, I
adopt
don't-
them?
I don't see this working group making those decisions.
No, I know,
I
but
see
I'm
that-
just saying, like, there's just so many pieces happening that it's.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of on, like, my point of view is, be flexible, try to do what's best with the city when an issue arises. Hopefully we have some plans in place and policy to handle it. But I'm gonna look towards staff and then this working group kind of to kind of determine where I'm gonna fall, because I don't know, if that makes sense.
Olivia?
Yeah, I agree. I think if you as the spokesperson for council during these meetings, it would be good to have a good understanding of how council as a group feels. And at the same time, clarify what we consider A, B, or C, or managed camp, or half managed camp. I think that would be very beneficial.
Okay. So what is your then, we've discussed, I hear that you agree with the merit of it, but how do you actually want to go about, are you proposing going about getting that information or having that input? Would it be a special study session?
I think the best approach is to put it on the next meeting that we have scheduled. Invite some of the people for feedback for as far as they can at short notice. But a lot of it is amongst us.
I was gonna say, will staff have enough time? No, not before the next meeting, like, for the chief and, like, to maybe research what's been done in other places. Like, that's what I would like to know. And, recommendations that staff has, and I don't think that can be effectively done in 2 weeks.
So, a couple things.
Yeah.
First, we have talked a little bit about the designated camping spots. And we had that meeting on Friday. I was with Chief Bramer, Dirk, Evan, I'm probably missing Turk, was in there. And it doesn't seem that any spots were actually designated. So the answer to that question is we don't really have designated spots that were ever designated. I think it gave it to the city manager, but at the time the city manager never designated, here are the spots that would be for camping. So kind of what I'm hearing a bit on it is more of maybe of an educational, just to kind of just be more of an overview of where we are. What is it that we have? We look at the designated camping. I think that's the first thing that we can say is we don't have any spots designated. We have the ability to designate and be able to grab some discussion in regards to what were some of the thoughts of what that might look like, some of the things we should be thinking about. We can provide some background in regards to camping. I think I'm gonna have to look and rely on Kevin. I know he's been part of it, and so now that he's back, to have some information on that. I think we could put together a pretty good presentation in 2 weeks. I don't know if it's going to hit everything that you might look at, but I think it might provide that opportunity for council to really have discussions with each other on some of these matters, and which I think we agree that we haven't had that opportunity to discuss, and just help us inform. And if we need one after that or more information on something there, we could definitely do so. I think that's something that we could do. Chief Bramer is actually out for the next 3 weeks. He is in Boston doing a class. So Bryce is here then. I think Bryce is very familiar with it.
Yeah.
He'll be able to help and go through that. So I think maybe starting off on the 5th, 19th, looking at this as a agenda item. We have right now adjournment at 4:10, so we do have 40 minutes maybe that we could put on to begin this discussion.
So may I push back just a little?
Sure,
bit?
please.
Waiting 2 weeks when we all have an urgent deadline in front of us may not give the working group the information that I think is appropriate coming from council, even if it's to say, I don't have an opinion right now because I haven't heard enough, or I have an opinion on, a managed camp or something. So I'm just pushing back that waiting 2 weeks doesn't empower a working group to work on a schedule and come back to the council on a regular basis with information. Waiting 2 weeks would be the 19th. Our meeting with the county commissioners is the 28th
When's your first meeting with the working group?
this week.
And when's your second,
The following,
We
I think they're on. weekly
Committed to
basis.
trying to work on details, whether it's looking at what does an RFP look like, anything to working through the details that we need. And then like
Well, the
we,
reason why I'm asking is so if we want to move this conversation closer to time, if you're meeting on Thursday and then Thursday.
it's not the same day every
Oh,
week.
okay.
We can't do that.
I think that I'm okay with waiting until the 19th, you having a working group meeting, even without that general knowledge, just kind of working, right, like moving through the steps and then us doing, because it feels like there's room here. It feels like it gives staff a little bit of time to get a presentation together. I don't want it to be rushed because I won't make a decision if I don't have the information that I feel like I need.
And I really want both, Olivia and Jessica to feel like they're up to speed on historically where we've been. I think it's super important. I am also in favor of keeping them on the 19th because I want all counselors to be present for this conversation. And I don't want someone to have to miss it. And so I think it's important to try to stay on track. And I think it would be a great opportunity to have this background and ask questions, Kevin has so much experience and information on what we've been through.
Yeah.
And so we can all talk about it then, and I think that would be really good. And you're just gonna need to make it very clear to the working group that
Yeah, no.
you recognize that they have this self-imposed deadline, but we have to operate under the terms of our
Yeah.
agreements of how we operate. And so no, you can't convey anything as to, you have to make it very clear that council has
I
not
think it's the same way
given
we
any
did
direction.
same way we did the wildfire and watershed protection fund.
Right.
Just keeping it moving, but
Yeah.
bringing it back. I think the other question though is should the city manager incorporate an update for the remainder at least of the summer and into the autumn on where we're at with this transition, with the plan for what to do? Does that make sense to be a part of his organizational update, which is
I don't understand your question again either.
So maybe I can help. So one of the things is we're talking at our one-on-one is how do we make sure that we keep the council communicated with it. And so in my mind, obviously emails, which I do is like, here's a summary of the meeting. But I think that there's also an opportunity to put it in like the organizational update in the regular council meeting we have at the beginning, putting just a bullet underneath there that would stand on through that would talk about managed camp discussions with county, something like that, where I can bring an update in public, throw it out, have an ability to have any types of discussion or comments that the council may want. So it really is just
Or a
another,
vote.
or
a vote.
if I did a vote, I'd probably put it in a different part of the agenda,
Yeah.
like under general business or anything like that if we need direction. But it's really more of a part where we have just something every 2 weeks that's on our council meeting that's guaranteed an ability for the council to hear any updates or ask any questions. Because sometimes even as a summary email on an update, and you may have questions and we don't want to do a serial meeting, it just provides an opportunity, just another moment, I guess you could say, to have that ability to have those questions.
Plan to have it public be up to speed on
Sure.
what we're doing. And I also wanted to make a comment about, so right now our ordinance addresses overnight camping. And that's different than camping. And I think we need to be really clear when we have these conversations, what we're talking about. I would hate to have people say, okay, I agree to camping. And one person's definition is they get to start at 8 and they have to be gone by 7. And the other person's definition is they're 24 hours a day. Because they're very two different challenges and how to manage them. So I would just like to make sure that we are clear on that when we have these discussions, what we're talking about.
I'd also like to be up to date because I don't know very much like legislation, like current legislation and like where it falls and what we're required to provide, what we want to provide as a council,
Right.
like as a city, like, and the differences, if that makes sense. Cause I don't know if anything's changed recently with, this whole Boulder
She's
thing.
asking
that's
for
gone.
an
Yeah, I
update
don't think
in
we're,
future.
yeah, I don't think we're necessarily
No,
discussing it
no,
now.
during the, but no, not now, but during the meetings
So what
in
I
the
would
future.
suggest on that, because I agree
In
with
the
you,
future.
is that maybe what we should all do is put in a list of things like that.
Yeah.
That we'd like to discuss during the study session topics, so that we make sure we hit each person's needs, and that would be one of those things you could put into that.
And I would add, while the ordinance says set up 1 hour before sunset and 1 hour after, I think it's important, particularly for the new counselors, to get a sense of what in reality happened with regard to people not being able to winterize their camps, not being able to set up, and the risks that we all dealt with for hypothermia and exposure. So I think it's one thing to have the ordinance, and it's another thing to have the history of what actually happened in that winter.
So that would be one of the things you put in
Right,
your
Right,
list.
so I think it's,
Did you want to say something?
No, I thought,
kind-
I thought it was questions
No.
in my way that came in.
Just
Would that
for the
work
future.
for everybody though, if we all kind of say, here's, I want to make sure we hit this point in this conversation, so you don't, so something you're interested in doesn't get left out of the conversation.
so as the city manager, the collector of that items before the 19th. So what we'd have to commit to as a council is probably getting that to the city manager by a certain date that we agree upon, so that he and staff can prepare. So what's the date that we agree to have our questions and what we want covered in this meeting?
Or do you need it? What's the date?
I would say if we get it by Friday, it'd be perfect.
Friday? And what is the actual date?
It's the 8th.
So by Friday, the 8th, you'll have what it is you hope to have answered or addressed in the July 19th study session.
Can I just ask one more question
Please.
publicly here right now? Instead of by email, because I have one thing I can ask, I can do by email, but one of them I just wanted to throw out there for discussion, because I wasn't sure if we might want to include this, is I know we had a lot of back and forth at the last meeting about Project Moxie, is that what it is? Okay. And we agreed at that time with the county commissioners that, we didn't make decisions, but we directed staff, because there was support to do a limited scope of that. And I wasn't sure if we wanted more discussion as a city council as to really what that scope, what council might be interested in more of that scope,
Is
and
that-
narrowing that down together, because there was a huge list and we all agreed we did not want that huge
Yeah.
list. Do we want to address that anymore together as a team? I'm just throwing it out there. It
But is
felt
that
like-
us or us in the county, because it's joint
Well,
money?
yeah, but
So
should we have an idea at least, and then they
What
can
we
kind of.
want.
wasn't
And
sure.
I also like to know the legalities, because I did ask Dirk at the end of the meeting, can we even do that? Because I know we've hired Project Moxie
That's
for a
right.
very different
It's a
project,
different
which
project, yeah.
may not then, you may have to put it all out to a new RFP.
So that's another thing on the list, right?
Well, I think that's why we were looking to Dirk for the support of,
Well,
And I think when we walked away, we were looking to the county to hire, but I do think that would be appropriate for the list, and we can discuss that.
Okay,
I also talked with Marcia today about exactly what you're talking about, and the county is looking at taking like the triage Purple Cliffs and close it, and hiring Project Moxie to do that part for them. So there's a whole section there that we wouldn't even be involved
okay,
in.
good.
So that would be a good conversation.
Yeah, okay, because I know Olivia wasn't there, and also we were somewhat, and it was kind of hard, because honestly, it was even a difficult conversation for me at the time, because we hadn't had a chance to talk about it as a council, and I really value that opportunity to see where we are as a team. And we run things off each other and, grow in our own conversations. So I was wondering if we wanted to add that.
so I
Or what
think,
campsites you would recommend. That was a big one. It was on the agenda, and we hadn't even talked about it.
so I think we're clear that by Friday, every
Yes.
council will submit the questions or the items that they want covered. Are there any, because I'm looking at the clock, are there any
Yeah.
other items for new business? Good, okay. All right,
Okay.
Kevin, you are up. We have 50 minutes allocated for presentation and questions.
Because
Yeah,
I
we
was
have-
just like,
Oh, no, yeah, they pointed to where they sit here. So Scott and Daniel are
Yeah.
going to join us.
Okay.
And
So we have 50 minutes allocated for both presentation and questions. We can go over, which council, if that happens, is limiting their break. So I do want to make certain that council gets the information they need. Are you proposing that we go through at the whole presentation and then ask questions, or would you want it as we go?
We have 50 minutes. Staff has no intention of going over 50 minutes. It's really up to councilors as to how you want to use that time. Fairly loosely structured here, and I think if you have questions along the way, ask them. I think this is an opportunity for a conversation about what we have in place, a little bit of history. I'm going to let Scott really run with the presentation, and let's just see where this goes. We don't really need any specific outcomes here, but we are looking for feedback. It's been a while since we've checked in on some of the adopted plans in place and see whether there's opportunities for improvement. We can talk a little bit about some of the current projects we have going on that relate to implementation. So with that, maybe I'll just pass it to Scott.
Great. Oh, Scott.
Yeah, feel free to jump in if you have questions, clarifications as I go. It's a pretty wide open topic, long-term vision for the city. So it can encompass a lot of different things. We kind of gave it our best shot to sort of set the groundwork, remind you of what things are in place, and then maybe do a check-in on, is that adequate to covering, how you would want the vision communicated to the community and back to staff. So this could be a pretty quick session, and we could just do that check-in and clarification, or if you want to have a more prolonged discussion, we could do that. It's staff definitely feels it, and I do feel it that day to day, there's so much in the thick of making decisions on specific issues, trying to do the best we can to stay on top of all the things that are going on. And I think a lot of times there's assumptions about what the vision is. And we don't sort of step back and say, okay, take a deep breath. Where are we headed? What are we shooting for in all these individual decisions and the work that we're doing? Jose and the executive team have definitely done a good job, training staff to always revert back to that, especially that strategic plan vision. How does this fit in? This decision, this initiative, how do we make sure it's all in line with where we're headed? So that's been really helpful. We've had some trainings recently as a staff about how do you stay nimble and agile, adapt to changing circumstances, but still maintain that sort of course for the overall vision. That's been really helpful. And I think reiterated for us how important that vision is. And so it'd be fun to hear what your thoughts are about the different visions that are in place. As we were going through this, and Daniel helped a lot to prepare the agenda doc, pulling visions out of different plans, there is a lot of consistency across those. Not necessarily overlap, but I think themes that start to come out when you look at the comprehensive plan, the multimodal plan, the housing plan. There is a lot of tie-in between all those areas. There's also sometimes some conflict between those different things about let's do a lot of development to get out ahead of the housing crisis, but also do it in an environmentally sustainable way. So we feel that tension sometimes and maintain our character and quality of life. So I'm excited, like I said, to just touch base with you and hear your feedback on the different things that are in place. So I have just a few slides to, again, start the conversation, get us all on the same page, using the words in the same manner. So when we think about vision, just a real simple definition, thinking, planning about the future with imagination. So planning is in there. So you ask a bunch of planners to talk about vision. We get excited. We get our flip charts, get Post-it notes, sticky pads. So we'll try and capture some of your feedback in that way. So these are some of the plans that currently have been adopted by council, are in place, that have some type of vision statement about their specific areas of concern. The strategic plan and the comprehensive plan will really hone in on, because those are very overarching. And those touch on a lot of different areas. As you go down this list, they get more sort of topic specific or focused on a given area. But you can see there are a number of different things in place that speak to who we are as a community. So to start with, something you're all very familiar with, you just, reiterated that this strategic plan vision is something you want to stick with. It's something it's on all your agendas. It's something we refer to very often when we're presenting you with options and projects to show you that it fits with that. So I think that's just one thing to touch base on as we begin, is reminding you of how you set this up. This is really focused more on the city organization, how we perform, and then what that results in our community. As we start to drill down, we look at the comprehensive plan, that starts to talk more about community character.
I think you can minimize it with a little.
It gets into land uses, the built environment, transportation networks, those types of things, and how we grow and how we're shaped as a community. So this was just most recently updated in 2017. We have a pretty extensive community engagement process to get feedback on that. This is pretty concise and all-encompassing, but then the comprehensive plan breaks down these different areas and how does that vision touch on all these different areas of what makes up our community. I think we see a need to go back out, since 2017, a lot's changed. We've had to respond to things that we could have never guessed about. And I think it's time to go back out and do some outreach to the community, particularly on how we grow, what is our character, our identity as a community, and the comprehensive plan is really a good way to do that. So we budgeted a little bit of money this year to start that process. We may try and do that over into 23 to get that community feedback and update the comprehensive plan so that it's relevant to what we're facing.
When you get that feedback, is this valid, or how do you do it?
We've done it in a number of different ways. There are surveys that we can set up and try and reach that goal. But a lot of it's more community open houses, outreach, those types of ways.
And Scott, I just pulled it up. So the Annos River Corridor Plan, the last time we looked at it was 1994. And
You can see there is a river. Parks, open space, and the natural environment. Those two sections of the comp plan speak to the river corridor, but the specific river corridor plan is very.
which would involve management of sites, put-ins, takeouts along the river, and the health and well-being of the river, both from a habitat. Give us a sense of what all's involved.
Yeah, some of that, and then also what does it look like? How does development interface with the river? Is a big part of that corridor plan. The setbacks, landscaping buffers, all those types of things. Building materials are all touched on in that corridor.
And the corridor plan really set the framework for the later plans to build off of it. Could there be a revised corridor plan? Well, certainly there could. I think that 94 plan, very specific in many ways, and some of that has proven to be effective to carry forward into some of these areas. There's not a necessity we have to have that corridor plan, but I think it is something that could provide more specificity than we have in our latter plans.
The other thing that happened just is the corridor plan came out before our land use and development code, so a lot of that was translated into standards that now are requirements, not just sort of observations.
Okay, and I have one more question just on in your materials, the downtown vision plan was the most recent one that you've listed is 2006. And I know we're in the process of reviewing that, so I was trying to get a sense of when that might come up through the process and how that would then be integrated with anything else of the more current planning.
That's a good question. The vision plan also speaks to a lot more than just the design of Main Avenue. So we were pretty intentional when we did Downtown Next Steps to say it's not an update of the vision plan. It was a very focused design of Main Avenue now with things changing. Vision plan talks about historic preservation, new buildings, how they fit in with the district, lots of other things, events, how do events happen downtown. So the vision plan is much more all encompassing than what we just went through on Main Avenue.
Thank you. Other questions, anything else?
So I think with that sort of groundwork, I know this was initiated by some counselors, a counselor, about how do we use all these different documents and make sure they are cohesive. I think it's really fortuitous or really good planning that this is going to lead into the 2015 authorization discussion, because I think to be successful with any ballot question, we have to have a very clear and compelling vision that appeals to a broad segment of our community. So hopefully some of these things can kind of carry forward into that 2015 discussion about, okay, this is our vision. What would we use resources towards accomplishing?
2005.
Thank you. So if you wanted to, like I said, I brought our flip charts. As I was going through this, and you think about what makes up a vision, there are those existing community attributes that we want to make sure we preserve, maintain, enhance. Those are the things that, while we all live in Durango, what makes it a very special place. But then there's also sort of these things that we need to create or get out ahead of, or deficiencies that we need to address. And I thought that might be a helpful way to get some feedback from council on, okay, when you think about what a vision for Durango, what are the existing attributes we want to make sure we maintain, enhance into the future? And then we can pivot into that secondary question about what are the deficiencies or threats that we need to get out of it. Does that sound helpful to council?
In some ways, I'd like you to use the frame of all these plans we currently have in place, all these things that look like we're doing really good at. It seems like we're in a good place versus things where, well, those plans say a lot of these things, but we've never really got to this issue. Because I think that gives us the opportunity then to, when we go into refinement on the comp plan in particular, or update of some of these older plans, if we end up going there, we'll have a pretty good sense of what this council feels are those areas of opportunity.
I can give you some feedback if you're ready. I think there was in the agenda 13 plans listed. So that's quite a big number. It makes everything a bit more complex. But I scanned through some of these plans and I've read them over time, multiple times. And they have a lot of good information. So I'll give you, because I wrote down a couple of comments here. And a lot of it is staff stuff or boards and commissions. I think I'm going to split this up between staff versus council, because I think the council actually as well. Like, for example, some of the maps show a connection to Lake Nyhurst. So those things are very good. And multimodal divisioning effort that I, at a certain point, would like to hopefully with council support, that ends up in an updated map with a vision that applies to multimodal. And that trail to Lake Nyhurst is, for example, on the Parks and Rec map, which is interesting because where do you draw a line? Which one, who should, our ART, if it's a commuter trail, is it Parks and Rec, or is it, and if it's connecting to the ART, is it, you know, all these questions, and I think that makes it a bit more complex for staff. And then there are connections on maps showing two Edgemont tributes. Simple, but I think if you have projects now within city limits, so under your umbrella, you need to have that checked off, as in, do you have a setback? Because maybe in 20 years there's going to be a commuter trail, and I'm not sure if that always takes place. Just in the streams of coast. The width of trails, another example on the behind the high school. I think it's unfortunate that we didn't make it wider because of the e-bikes, and then connections to schools, another example. But the plans specify all of this. And then I see sometimes projects come to us that I think, man, I wish that was done better. I'm not sure where the disconnect is. And the examples, I'll give you exact examples so you know where I'm coming from. 32nd Street, I think in one of the plans it says commuter trail separated, or good commuter trail. when that project came to council, it was a striped line on the road. So to me, it's not the same. Or the very recent one on Three Springs, where there was the building development to the west of the hospital, where I made the comment on why do we paint a line on the road? Why do we not connect it? Because that was a future connection straight through the mountain. So that we do the current projects with the long term in mind. But I think the plans are really good, and I think the system of the planning department and the planning commission to tie it together, and boards and commissions, is a system that is well designed. I just see sometimes things that we can improve, like these examples I gave you. The key problem that I have, and that impacts a lot of issues, is more for the council, that never addressed the fire district building, city offices, on a master plan, long-term master plan, location of facilities. Some of them are mentioned, some of them are not. And so I think it all needs to tie in better to each other. But the key one is Camino del Rio, and I bring this up quite often. If we're speaking of the underpass, we're speaking of the Adams River Trail connection north and south. If there is no vision, or the vision is what it is now, Camino del Rio stays the same for the next 20 years, doubling the size of our community, doubling the traffic, just throwing it out there, then it might change the need or the capacity of an underpass or multiple underpasses. If there is a vision, a long-term vision for bypassing Camino del Rio on Rosa or underground, it would change the whole dynamic of the underpass. It still might be necessary, or a traffic light, or whatever it is. And I think that is something for council to get on top of, because all these projects that we're spending in this, I'm going to stick with community underpass, budgeted at 3-something million. That's before the cost overruns of what, 50 to 100%. So, and that was just a ballpark estimate in the first place. That's a lot of money. And that highway has already been ripped open 2 or 3 times now. I think we need to do better. So that's not really your umbrella, but that's what this council should work on, and then get your recommendations on.
One thing, just one of your initial comments that I just want to make sure is highlighted, like you talked about whose realm of responsibility is it, transportation or Parks and Rec. All of these plans that were listed were created with interdepartmental collaboration and representation. So I think that's something we really emphasize, and staff from all those different areas are brought in. They're aware of it. They know how to implement it in their realm of responsibility. So I just want to make sure you're comfortable with that's how that happens. It's, just like with Downtown Next Steps, we have staff, stakeholder groups, streets is there, PD's there, everybody. So all that I feel is really strong as far as the collaboration, the awareness.
Can I just provide quick feedback? I want to provide for everyone else also. Councillor Bosman's, I know you're passionate about a vision for Camino and a possible solution or reconfiguration. I raised the question, though, that you have brought this up before. And so I'm trying to get a sense, and part of the reason we haven't discussed it is, and I've only been mayor for a few weeks, but in the past, I don't believe there's been a consensus around pursuing that, whether or not they're willing to interact with CDOT on something like this. So you're raising the question. I'm reminding council that it's been come up before. If there's a change of thinking or something along that line, then I think, but you need to hear from all of council, or at least a consensus of council, that it's worth the time and effort to pursue what might look like a different configuration of a major highway over which we have no control right now.
Is that what you're asking for?
I bring it up as a concern.
Yeah,
If the
no.
concern is shared, then it will be, I know it was already, the majority of council was not supportive of that kind of visioning. And to me, it's not necessarily that I'm for or against reconfiguring or tunnel or on Musa. I am, I'm not sure the right word, disappointed, frustrated, that we spend so much money on studies. There's 13 plants. And if you look at over time, I think some of these projects and studies are without knowing where you want to be in the long term. Councils should have a long-term vision. So I make the case that to me, it's important as one councillor. If it's not shared, that's okay. But when we do an underpass, my individual position would be, I think the underpass is great to address safety, but if you don't have a vision of how that's going to look, then I have a hard time justifying spending another 3, 4, 5, 6 million of taxpayers' money on a project, same as CDOT did with the medians. Before that, with concrete. I mean, there's.
I guess the question is, it's great to want to create a vision, but what's our sphere of influence with this? And maybe it's, maybe the discussion is this council, does it share the same concern you have or not? And if that's a discussion that needs to take place now or future, I bring that up. But I will remind everyone that we have discussed this as a possibility in the past, and I haven't seen the appetite. But if things have changed.
Well, I feel like we're having, I think, a 50-minute discussion right now on long-term vision discussion, because we recognize the and value. I think all of us see the importance of that. And you're right, there's 13 different plans. How do we pull those together? So I suggest that we listen to this presentation and think about it. And if you have things that this would be your opportunity, in my opinion, today, if you want to add to that vision, or if you have something that you think should be, you're suggesting connectivity, I hear. And if you're not seeing it as part of that, this would, I think, be the time to bring it forward to council. That major missing link in your mind is, let's just use this as a very small example, connectivity. Let's get that word or verbiage in here at the very top of all these other plans, so it trickles down. But I think maybe let's see where we go today. Let's listen to the presentation and see, we have 50 minutes discussion amongst ourselves. Maybe you're bringing up a point that we should be addressing. But look, I need to kind of get through this first and see where we go.
I just maybe add, I heard a number of things which you just shared, which told me that staff probably needs to keep more attention on follow-up in terms of plans that have been adopted. We come back and talk about the things that have been implemented versus things that have not. Because a number of the things you mentioned, I could go, oh yeah, that, I know about that. And we don't come back to council and tell you about why there isn't a trail at the Lake Nanos right now, or the trail out in Three Springs issue. But staff, my sense is amongst the various departments, has probably a lot of great information to explain those things. We just need to figure out what the right forum to do that is. So we already kind of bring so many things forward to council that, it's kind of a fine line.
On that note, I would just say, I feel like we trust you to bring forward the things that are important and know that, yes, we'd love a connection to Lake Nighthorse maybe, but it's not in the budget and something else might come up before it. In the Parks and Rec master plan, I wasn't a part of the 2020, I was a part of the one before because I worked for Parks and Rec then, but there was no pickleball. No one played pickleball. That was not in the 30 project list coming up, but it is now, and it's important now. And so I think it's important for us also to recognize we do have vision, but we can't see everything that's coming up. And so for us to be able to pivot and know, who knew 20, 30, 40 years ago that Edgemont would be as big as it is, but it is. And so then we have the tax and fix Florida and we pivot and we move. And when I was looking through these plans, and I didn't know about a lot of them, but I was the La Plosta Road area plan, do we need to update that? Probably not, but the URA is. And now it helps, all these plans help our vision. And so to hear you say, and I know you probably don't intend it as negatively as it comes across, but that council has no vision, it's insulting. And it's insulting to staff because I look at this and I think we have vision, and they all, like, you look at the multimodal plan with the Parks and Rec plan and they do align, and I see that vision coming to fruition. And we don't have the money to do everything that we want to do, but if we prioritize, and like the staff does, like, I feel like we do a phenomenal job with our vision. And it might not be the vision you want, but we don't not have a vision.
So
I'm not saying that.
You did.
thank you. Could I clarify with Scott with these two questions? Are you hoping from council to get a sense of how we prioritize addressing maintenance versus new issues? Provide us a little bit more information on, so that we're all clear, because I think I have an understanding, but let's all be clear on what is it you hope to gain?
I don't think it's necessary to think about, or let's come up with a vision statement
Right.
for council. That's, you've done that work, you've worked through that, we're good. I think
Thank you.
I just wanted these categories in mind, and it feeds into this next section where we talk about kind of the underlying issues or the underlying causes of some of the issues our community is facing, and what might be some of the ways to address those with it. So it was mainly an opportunity to check in, make sure we're going down the right path, and then we're going to move into a little more topic. So that was the goal. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time coming up with new components of the vision or anything like that. I did also want to circle back. The other thing that's tough about these is the time frame they play out. We had the North Main and Camino Character District plan, and that talked a lot to private development along those two corridors. But there was also a North Main mobility study that happened in 2014, 2015. Since that time, CDOT's re-striped, they grinded the road, multi-million-dollar project that implemented that vision for North Main and Camino to be multimodal. We've had a lot of private development that's moved towards that vision. We now have the mid-block crossing that was a part of that plan. So, and then the POSTA was initially planned for in 2015, but now it's just starting. So it often takes, some simmering and some time for the community to digest all that before the resources are made available and it gets implemented. It might feel like, why isn't this happening, or why isn't this being accomplished right away? But that's sort of the nature of a long-term vision, is it takes that time to become a reality. So
If I may, to your point, Scott, when some of those things happened back in 2015 or whenever, I'm sure staff updated council on what was going on, but none of us were on council then. And so it's also not that you didn't communicate, Kevin. I just want to say, I think you probably do, because I've experienced that you do. But sometimes it's like it gets lost in the background because it already got done, it already got communicated, and we're moving forward. I like your idea. Maybe there's some bullet points out of the plans about things that are supposed to have happened, and then maybe there's a like done 2027, no idea, whatever.
Kind of like what we do with the strategic plan, where how we get a regular update, cross these off.
Nothing that complex.
No, not that
Something
complex.
very simple.
Well,
I think
in
it is a
fact,
something.
just asking questions that come through Jose's office allows us to provide feedback. Not that I'm asking for a groundswell of new questions to be addressed, but I mean, if there's a burning question, why didn't this get done? Ask the question and we'll get you the answer. And I mean, that's straightforward and forced to do.
I have a question. First, I think the actual execution of the project is not so much part of the vision. It's more, that is the vision that happens at a certain point on how you operationally assure current projects meet the standards of these plans. You have, I assume it's a system in place where the planning department checks off all these plans and it says meets the requirements of this and this and this, and your recommendation is A, B, or C, and then the planning commission says yes or no, or which whatever option they like. So that system is in place, correct? Yeah.
And, projects typically, Scott's talking about, go to all of the departments that may have a touch on them, so they can provide feedback as well, since they're going to be probably closer to being the subject matter expert on their particular plans. For instance, the transportation department obviously is the multi-core plan. So we wouldn't just rely on our staff. We might make a good interpretation, but we're always going to check in, make sure we haven't missed anything, or if one of the boards had something to say about this that modify the direction of the plan. make sure we cover all bases.
And then the boards and commissions with their current project prioritization, I think that whole system works as it's designed. I think that is good. That it changes is the way it is. I
And that
guess.
can impact plan, plan is only as good as the information you've collected at the time in which the council adopts the plan. And as you noticed, they're very dynamic, changing environment.
So I'm going to go back to in here. Scott, do you have more slides that you want to take us through?
Yep.
Thank you.
How are we looking at time?
You're at 3:15. 20 minutes.
Go through these, and I think it will be a nice bridge into the next topic. It starts to delve into a little bit more primarily land use, transportation, sort of quality of life concerns. Like I said, there's the strategic plan and that vision for the city organization, well established and becoming more and more reality every day. But thinking about our realm, primarily in community development, is how are we growing and shaping as a community? This idea of how to, and it goes back to that maintenance versus expansion idea. How do we address the issues that our community is facing? And these are some of the principles that came up, primarily related to La Posta. This is where these started to kind of germinate and have some influence on how we're approaching these bigger projects. So just at the heart of a lot of the things we're facing, job opportunities, housing, transportation, these are related to developable land served by city services so that they can be reach their highest and best use. There's a lack of that, either topography or just the services aren't there, the system isn't in place. The way the city can really start to achieve that vision is by providing services to these areas. That's a main role that we can play. Transit, water, sewer, police services, that's how we can signal to the private sector, this is where we want to grow, this is where we want to see new investment. Third, generally the city is better equipped to handle these complex situations where there's mixes of land uses, there's a lot of different players. And so that puts us in a position to be a lot more proactive, and like we're doing on La Posta, organize landowners, start to come up with a plan and not just react to what comes in the door. So that's why we're taking that approach. We feel like we're best equipped to direct that, govern those complex situations. Community leaders, I would include council and staff in that, expected to anticipate things and proactively move towards solutions. Again, impetus behind La Posta, some of the other projects we're going to talk about. Idea about partnerships, something you've heard me harp on a lot. And then thinking about incremental and adaptive ways to get towards that vision. If you have the mile marker, you can feel comfortable not taking the giant leap to get there in one fell swoop, but taking the right steps towards that end goal is okay. You don't need to all of a sudden end up with a fully developed city subdivision right off the bat. We can take some incremental steps to get there.
So before you switch, can I just ask council, do you agree with these guiding principles? Do you have any that you disagree with? Because this will inform staff's actions.
I absolutely agree with the idea that community leaders are expected to anticipate problems and proactively advance solutions, not just wait and respond to them, because we get ourselves in trouble by just hanging out and letting things happen.
Are there any that you disagree with?
No.
I'm just going to go around and then to make certain we have a consensus. We're not directing, but I want to make certain we're on board with what will be guiding the staff's actions. You have a strong opinion for or against, but I will ask, is there consensus on these guiding principles?
I'll respond. If I get this in advance, I'll have a bit more time to think about it, but they seem to make sense.
Could I just add, this isn't intended to be something that we're documenting and approving
I understand.
and adopting, but it's really how we go about our days.
Exactly.
And I believe this is how the council goes about their days as well, generally speaking.
Understood. I just want to make certain that we, as a council, discuss this because it does form so much of your work plan and we don't direct your work plan. Any other support or against? Jessica, Melissa. Looks great. Looks great. Melissa.
I'm taking it all in, honestly. I don't really have a comment this time.
Okay. And it all makes sense to me. What you
And we
propose.
will share the slide deck, and it's a little late in the coming.
Right.
If you have thoughts later, pass them through Jose and.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So, and then circling back to this top one, that's one of those things that starts to present that tension of, we have these issues, we feel like they can be addressed by some thoughtful and smart expansion of city services, city limits, but we also want to preserve and enhance that the great character, walkable, transit served type of community that we have, and not just sort of mindlessly sprawl or do that without being thoughtful about it. So this is really what we are trying to find that sweet spot of, and what's come to sort of fruition is this idea of the strategic expansion area. So we're not just, again, responding to whoever comes in the door. We're starting to say, here are areas that make the most sense. They're in close proximity to city services. We can logically extend them. They're kind of reasonably the next phase of growth for the city. And there's also, it's development, but it's also quality of life assets. So on here, Durango Mesa is identified as one of the strategic expansion areas because it serves existing residents. It's not just new population, new growth, but we need to find a way to do this in a way that bolsters our existing population and community, not just bringing in new people.
Do you have Durango Mesa Park listed on there?
No.
Okay, so you're just saying,
Yeah.
oh, here it
Yeah,
is.
so let me just touch on this.
Okay,
and I'll
let
go
me-
to the map.
Okay.
And can I clarify something?
Yes.
Because a couple of times we've talked about population increase. And I think it's important, as we're talking about as this housing, that we also keep in mind, yes, there may be population increase, but the commuter may decrease. And that will be a measure of success that the people who work here can actually live here. So I think we have to keep that balance, that I would like to ask you to think about that perspective.
Kind of to your point too, Barbara, many studies have shown that about a 2% growth is required in order to manage inflation, which of course now we know right now that's not great, but to manage the costs of increased streets repair, street building, housing, police services, fire district services. So in many ways, if we aren't growing at a manageable, reasonable rate, what will end up happening is the people who live here will end up, it will be a more expensive place to live because they'll end up having to pay more for the services that are increasing in cost. And so the idea of expansion versus expensive, which was you guys may remember Roger giving a presentation on that, about communities who have expanded with their needs of growth are reasonably priced and people can live there. Ones that haven't become expensive enough to not be sustainable. And I believe that report was done in like 2018 or 2019. I can't remember. I have it if you want to see it, but Durango was already moving its way up into the expensive versus being in the affordable. So I think that this is the idea of needing to grow. I've had some people say to me, well, we don't want growth. And I said, well, there's one reason why you might, but another reason why you might is that the people that we want to have live here, so we have growth for them, are the people who work here and contribute, but they have to live somewhere else, like outside of our area, and they have to commute in, to your point. So to make it a more like mixed income and multivariable community with people living here who actually contribute to our culture and our good way of life, I think growth is going to be needed, and I hope people can recognize that.
Any other thoughts on growth versus existing and the prioritization of that?
So this is starting to take shape, at least in sort of our minds, about a framework for how we can touch on a bunch of different community priorities right now in sort of like a cohesive way that's pretty compelling. And this idea of here are a few areas where we think need like a little push to reach their full potential, or a big push, maybe lots of investment to get there. Infrastructure for Durango Mesa, there's some estimates now that are, tens of millions of dollars to get up there. The Post is going to be similar. Three Springs is going to be similar, but that's not out of the realm of possibility. We can bond for that much money. We can start to do these things if we have a real cohesive and compelling vision of why we're doing this, how we're going to do it in a way that's equitable, that touches on the real needs of our community members. And like I said, this is starting to feel like a little bit of maybe a way to present that. And this will be iterative. We'll take feedback and we'll discuss it. But these three areas, as I've mentioned in the past, and as we've talked about a lot, start to hit on all those different areas. The Post has a commercial, light industrial component for business expansions, job growth, those types of things. It's also beginning to get more and more of a housing component the more we talk to people about what they want to do with their property there. Three Springs has a quality of life component with the community park, potentially a school site, a lot more housing. Durango Mesa, obviously a massive, quality of life asset for the community that needs a big injection of capital to make it come to that next step. And then that has a domino effect, with funds and all those things that start to play. So this is my last slide, just for clarification. And I didn't want to hijack the vision conversation, but I wanted to present you with, something that we think about a lot, and what we're hearing from community members, what we're hearing from you all in your meetings. This framework starts to maybe touch on all those things.
And these three areas are three areas that there's a lot of staff time going into working with the community partners on.
Can you address how you're interacting with the infrastructure needs of all of this? So with water, sewer, roads, stormwater issues, what is the connection there? And then also, can you address maintenance? Because you started with a slide of maintenance and new, and what is your thinking around how to maintain what we have and keep that in balance?
Well, the first question about infrastructure, that's a lot of what we're thinking through right now, and that hits on that bullet point, that principle of the provision of services sort of leads the way and paves the way for private investment to follow after it. So for the Posta, you just approved $650,000 to do road, water, and sewer design. So we're taking the lead on that. Whereas sort of the past position would have been, developer comes in the door, says, I want to do this thing. We say, okay, great, you need to design and build this intersection, this sewer line, this water line, and they say, I can't make that work. So we're trying to get out ahead of that, do that in more of an area-wide basis so that it's ready to go. It may still be the responsibility of some of the private sector to pay for that, but we have a design that we know anticipates the build out of the area and is a way to meet our standards, is a design that meets our standards. So that's a big part of the Posta. Three Springs Village 2, we're starting to have that same conversation about, they've looked at the cost to expand into their next growth area, and they just say it doesn't work for us, we can't cancel that. So how do we right size the standards for that infrastructure? And do we have a role to play in contributing towards that infrastructure in exchange for a commitment of land or deed restricted housing units or whatever the case may be? That gives us a lot more leverage to require that return on our investment if we're a partner in getting that infrastructure put in. I didn't give Turi a heads up. He could speak a lot more eloquently than I could to Durango Mesa and more specifically about it. But I know they've been doing a lot of work to look at access up there. Kevin, maybe you're able to chime in as well about the cost to get up there and open up.
It's a very similar process, really, about partnerships and who's investing in what, and timing, as well as this idea of phasing. Because if it's all about infrastructure, and it's all about infrastructure up front before you do anything, it moves forward. I mean, the Posta is a poster child 2013, we identified infrastructure needs to open it up down there. And there was no clear path forward in terms of how that infrastructure would get paid for and installed. And it's sat. And so now we're taking a slightly different approach, which is very partnership oriented and city taking the lead, working with the partners. And the Mesa is really no different. Obviously, the foundation has been moving this forward from their vision, but we adopted a plan. We've been working with them since 2016. I think there's been some real progress made lately. The foundation board hired an engineering firm that's not looking at the infrastructure. I know Terry's working with that team of partners to come forward and share some of that information pretty quickly here in the near future. But it's very similar in all three of these areas.
Is there,
No, please, go ahead.
is there a planned financial participation for developers? If we put the infrastructure in place, the roads and everything, are they going to, beside the impact fees and the sewer tap fees and so on, are they going to be participating financially when they start develop? In the end, if you have a lot of land there, when you put a road in there with the utilities, that lot of land just triple in value. Which is, I mean, that's the way the world works, I guess. But it might be something that recovers itself to a certain degree.
And that's really the beauty of the URA tool. Is if we go in, and set up an urban renewal district before all of those improvements happen, we set the base at that current value, and then all that growth in value comes back in to help pay for maintenance of that infrastructure or to pay off debt from that infrastructure. That's really the value in setting that up early, so that doesn't just flow to, I mean, the property owners will get some benefit, obviously, and they'll have more opportunities to develop their land, but the growth and tax revenue can be used right back into that district instead of being just dispersed among all the entities.
And for that opportunity, there may also be commitments of affordability or workforce development.
And that's just a quick question on the 650,000 for the Poster Road. So that is a project that we're taking the lead on, and it's designed for water, sewer infrastructure
The road,
and road.
a traffic study and road design from a highway down to the south end of the Poster area.
Okay. Over what, how long? Side of the road, how many miles is that?
It's about two and a quarter.
Okay, how long will that take?
That's a good question. We're putting the RFP together right now to get bids for engineering services. We know all the engineering firms are busy. It's a big project, long corridor, so maybe into 23, possibly late 23. There are steps we can be taking specifically to La Posta while that's happening, though. There's a lot of things running parallel that we can be doing. We don't just have to wait until that's done.
But that's the whole, that's the plan. That just tells us what, will it tell us how expensive it's going to
Yes,
cost?
cost estimates, yeah. And those will be shovel-ready plans. So we can take that to a funder, federal grants.
Nice.
Low interest loans we'll have. So this is what we need to build, and that'll be ready to go.
Excellent.
So
Water,
you,
sewer, road.
Yes.
Okay.
so you brought what you see as potential expansion areas. You're bringing it to us. We're not voting on anything now. Will there be another, that's one on the expansion. Will you also be sharing with us where you think the issues are that need to be maintained? And where are the issues there that maybe are out of compliance with maintenance that should be happening?
So I think that comes by way of the process that we already have in place. So your public works department is going to certainly share with you, the road assessments, the issue of stormwater that are mainline systems, and we already know some of this, so it does come to you. It wouldn't necessarily all funnel through, let's say, kind of this tip of the spear Scott's talking about. These are three areas that we're investing a lot of time and resources in right now. But we certainly every day are dealing with infill development, city-owned parcels, a lot of other things that are going on, and I've fairly confident that everything we're working on is very consistent with either with all of these plans that we've been looking at, including the strategic plan. Certainly, if there's budgeting issues or very big hard lefts on what we have going on, those come back to council for guidance. But typically, our day-to-day is really driven by these plans in place and the things that we hear from the council from time to time. So it isn't as such we need to come forward and say, "Are you ready to go?" Scott just had, well, I think Scott was out of town. I think Daniel actually maybe queued this up, the La Posta funding. Was that? Yeah. Very consistent with our past conversations with plans in place. And council is informed through agenda docs and we took formal action. And those kind of processes will continue.
Olivia, it looks like you have something.
Yeah, I think this is becoming more a project here, the discussion, but if I bring it back to the vision, I really hope that when, for example, on the poster, you take into account the vision for, let's pick again, commuter, to have, when you do the roads, you know, the best standards for commuters, even though there's no use because nothing is developed. The intention is in the long term to have it, and if you build everything up and then have to take back property or do something to run a bike path and a pedestrian path, it becomes problematic. So hopefully, I trust
But
you.
I think that, yeah, our staff does that, but like other, like Animus View Drive, for example, you can't. Like, we can have the best intentions and want things there, but because of setbacks and property or whatever, we do the best we can. And I want to say that looking at this, like with the 2013 La Posta Road area plan, clearly we couldn't get there without doing what we're doing, without the $600,000 commitment. And so I think that the creativity and vision that this current staff has, it's remarkable with what we're doing and what potentially we could do with re-upping sales taxes for other things.
So one of the conversations I had a couple of years ago with the landowners that are currently under conversation with a different project was that the development standards for La Posta included a connection to the art. And with that and in the easement area where that needed to go, the cost of that was just outrageous for them. And so it's already in the conversation. I mean, like that's there. That connection, that commuter connection, which I think is awesome. And now we have to figure out how do we make it so it's not negatively impactful to development and make it be a benefit to the community that lives there and also to the people in town so that there's less cars, all that. So I'm supporting what you're saying is I think those conversations do happen and that they are there. Yeah.
It's another benefit of us kind of taking the lead too and having some resources to put behind it, because the pressure we get the other way is just compromise on those standards so I can do my job.
Right.
And waive the requirement.
Exactly.
He hates that conversation.
Right.
And so now we're in a position where we can say, no, we're going to build it to what the community expects, what we all want to maintain that character activity. But that means we're more at the table and we're more contributing to shaping things.
So I'm going to just try to summarize what I heard and make certain that council, he said it was his last slide, right?
Yes.
So I think what we heard is that we appreciate the vision work that has taken place and it's building upon previous work and continuing. It's done in an anticipation of addressing the quality of life for people here, but also recognizing, I think what I heard is that there's growth is inevitable. In fact, it's necessary to maintain the kind of revenues that we're going to need, but also that what we might hope is that more people will be living here, able to live here rather than commuting here. And finally, with the form of commuting, that it's important that we address all forms of being able to commute, that the roads be according to standard, but also that we have transportation lined out to that or other multimodal capacities, whether that's trails. Is that a safe summary of all the points, or does somebody else have something to add?
I would add that what I heard, and I think this is a really good presentation. I like the way you laid it out and kind of brought us through each one, starting with the maintaining and versus addressing versus creating. But the part that I would add, which I took away from this, is really important, and that's why I see you saying it's a good primer for our next discussion, is the lack of developable land to served by city services being the root cause of many of our issues.
Mhm.
And thus, with that lack of land, looking at what staff is working on very hard in these 3 areas.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate that. And what it makes me think of, we've started with the plan on the POSTA, and we've got other conversations definitely going around the other Durango Mesa and Three Springs, but it's so appropriate for a long-term vision plan, because it all will cost millions and millions and millions of dollars to develop the infrastructure around here. But I also see us having the conversation and really working at Three Springs to get that to a standard such that it can be developable for housing. So I just appreciate the way you guys laid this out, because to me, it makes real sense. And I do think it's one of the key long-term things that we have to address. How can we get to expand and to develop these partnerships such that we can expand in these areas and bring private investment there? So I like the way you guys laid it
Thank
out.
you. Scott and Kevin, is there anything else you needed before we
I
wrap
just
this up?
would say thank you, because these are important conversations to have, check-ins and that sort of thing. This is the work we do daily. Sometimes we don't get a chance to really share it with you. So this was a nice 30,000-foot level discussion about what we have in place and where we're headed.
Great, thank you. I'm going to suggest we take a 4-minute break and reconvene so we can get back on schedule for the next topic, the 2005. Let's see, is that the next one? Yeah, 2005 sales tax. So back in at 3:45, please.
Okay.
Dirk also has worked into his schedule.
Absolutely. So thank you, Mayor and Council. This is our first discussion on the 2005 sales tax reauthorization. Understanding that this is coming up here in the next couple of years, we wanted to be able to have a presentation that really kind of opened up the discussion for the council. Talks about all the potential uses that we could use with the 2005 sales tax, what the uses are now. So some of the ideas are probably going to be a little bit more formed than others, but we definitely kind of went into a no stone unturned. What's all the options that are out there? From this, we'll have next steps, but I would also imagine that we'll probably be able to get some feedback from the council of which of these priorities may be more higher ranking in importance and which may not be areas that may have any interest or little interest on it. So with that, I'm going to kick it to Devin. She's going to be doing the presentation, but we obviously have some interested staff members as well that lead different teams that can be affected by these authorization or reauthorization, and here to answer any questions or ability to expand upon maybe some of the ideas that they could use to fund it.
So can I propose something to council? Because what I heard Jose say is that he's hoping to get some consensus around what might be a couple of priorities and what might we say we don't want. So could I suggest that we, if that's what you're hoping to get, could I suggest that we go through the whole presentation and then maybe talk about them one by one? Does that make sense? Or does anybody have a different plan?
Don't necessarily have to have 2 or 3, but it's more like lines to if there's anything in here, because we still have time to filter them down.
Okay.
But more if there's anything in here that maybe there is no interest in spending any time on, it would probably be a little bit more helpful. So I don't want to make sure that y'all give us 3 and then we're going to go from there. Let's see if there's things that maybe you're just like, no way, let's stop wasting time on that.
Okay, so we might have questions, but we're not going to be discussing prioritization to the very end, and just to say, not even a prioritization of just support for further continuation.
Excellent. Thank
Take
you,
it away,
Jose.
Devin.
Yeah, thank you for that great introduction. As Steve mentioned, we had a big team that got together and really worked on this. So hopefully we're able to address any questions or provide any additional details as needed. Strategic alignment, financial excellence, and high-performing government. We also have effective infrastructure network. So kind of to set the stage here, we started off with what the current 2005 ballot language covers, its uses for the taxes. And so if we're just looking at that bold area there, it's really talking about to finance acquisition of open space, development of parks and trails, and to finance capital improvement projects. This current quarter of the sales tax covers Florida Road as well as the library debt. So that's kind of that current process for what was proposed back in 2005. So just wanted to set the stage with what the current ballot language says and what those uses are currently. Also wanted to provide the opportunity for council to see some other communities and what they have for their general fund sales tax, as well as kind of those more earmarked sales taxes. As you can see, Durango has kind of the bigger bucket of diverse earmarked sales taxes compared to some of the other communities that were looked at. I'd say Glenwood is probably the next closest with what those different percentages are that are earmarked for those sales taxes. Some of the other communities that we looked at have smaller areas for what those go for, and they're a little bit more prescribed, as you can see there. So wanted to give council the opportunity to be able to kind of see that, what kind of other areas are doing, and have that opportunity. So then moving on, we are really deep into forecasting right now. And so one of the areas that we wanted to include in here was the 2 sides of the quarter-cent tax, so the post and the debt, to show kind of what we're projecting out for until the tax sunsets. After the tax sunsets, if council wish to reauthorize, the total pool of money, if you will, would be around 5.6 million based on our current projected analysis right now. So if that was 1 bucket of money, it would be that 5.6. If it was 2 buckets or 3 buckets or 10, it would be divided accordingly. So that's just based on our current forecasts. One of the things we talked about as a group is really what is that process before the ballot question? I know council had requested Salt Fab to consider the sales tax plans and development, so looking at the 05 sales tax plan, renew, let it sunset, renew with restrictions, some thoughts around maintenance, and really what's that kind of that long-term strategic plan or financial plan around that sales tax. I believe that 19 was mentioned as well as 15, but since we're talking about the 05, we'll stay there. So after Salt Fab or parallel to Salt Fab, the recommendation would be that there's a citizens committee, which would include citizen output, polling, and outreach to really determine what is the desires of the community, and where's the support. And then from there, it would be really narrowed down into council selecting a proposed ballot issue, and then narrowing that scope of those possible uses. So that's kind of that process before it really even hits the ballot. Also wanted to provide kind of the timeline here. We're early in the process, but there's a couple different opportunities where this could be a ballot issue. So starting with April of 2023, November of 2023, November of 2024, or April of 2025. And just as a reminder, the tax ends or sunsets at the end of 2026. So wanting to start the conversation early, as Jose mentioned, and just kind of provide that timeline of what we're looking at for potential ballots. So from there, we work to determine some of the needs and potential uses for reauthorization, and this is by strategic plan goal. So the first bucket there is looking at housing and economic development, followed by preservation, acquisition, and maintenance of natural lands. So this is the same ballot language that was included in the original creation of the 05, and then moving on into that effective infrastructure network, which would look at more stormwater CIP, public transit, CIP. And this is also included in the language that says included but not limited to sidewalk and roads, the sidewalk district creation and implementation, bridge repair and replacement of CIP and facilities. So this is just by a strategic plan, and those are some areas where there could be some reauthorization, and then finally facilities. So as we take a deeper dive into some potential opportunities for reauthorization, the first one we have listed is parks, open space and trails. So really after the tax sunsets, there's no dedicated sales tax at that point for annual parks, trails, recreation, and facilities improvements. The annual open space maintenance and fire mitigation, natural lands preservation and open space acquisition, as well as that interfund transfer that supports that post-maintenance and operation. So after it sunsets, certainly the general fund could absorb some of that burden. However, that is really what it's dedicated towards currently. So potential use of the funds if it were reauthorized. So you could utilize the funds for maintenance and operations of the existing post facilities, including large renovation projects. Keep post ballot as is to allow for new construction as well as maintenance projects. And then finally, looking at really specific identified projects. So something like during a Mesa Park to have it very specific to those types of projects. So that's some opportunities there if that were to be the preferred reauthorization. Moving on into housing. So currently in housing, there is fair share and transfer fees, as well as the temporary ARPA funds, which currently cover the division costs. Some of the challenges are that those fees are inadequate to meet the needs. So it's, we get the fees in, we put them in the fund balance, we build them up, and then EVA comes with a great housing project. And then from there, that's how that project occurs. It's a little bit difficult to forecast because those are based on when a development opportunity occurs. And I think Kevin's talked a lot about that, how challenging that can be to predict when something's going to come forward. And then, if it were to be another big project like we saw this year, that 500,000 that was transferred to the URA, currently there's not enough funds in the housing fund to sustain the process there. So potential uses in this area would be around covering pre-development work to really fast track priority housing projects, designing and constructing infrastructure to achieve multiple benefits, including housing production, offset development costs in exchange for long-term workforce units, preserving existing naturally occurring affordable housing, and then expanding current partnerships and programs. So those are some opportunities if this were to be reauthorized for this purpose. And next we have public transit. And so with public transit, the current revenue state, there's the 1.6 million in annual revenue with the FTA grants, lodgers tax, and the fare box revenue. Parking revenue is obviously a big component of that, and then the CRISA, and ARPA funds that are funding transit currently at 100%. That's through June of 2023, so it's really sustaining current service levels through the end of 2024. Some of the challenges with this revenue source is that the 2.5 million in annual transit operating budget is, and as we're looking at our forecast, looking at future years, we're trying to factor in the cost of inflation, benefits, and that's going to be across all the funds. So things, of course, continuously get to be a bit more expensive. To sustain really those current service levels beyond the COVID relief funding, Durango Transit will face an annual deficit of approximately $925,000, which can't be funded by parking revenues. So to really achieve those strategic plan goals of expanding transit, Durango Transit will need further dedicated funding. And then, so the uses would really be to look at increased transit frequency, increased service area, expanded service hours, improved ADA access to transit stops, and zero emission vehicle buses, if that were the selected reauthorization. Moving on to streets and stormwater CIP. So the current state council is obviously aware that we have the 2019 sales tax. The challenges with that, however, is that the streets and the right of way has adequate roadway funding until that tax expires in 2029. But that doesn't take into account the needed sidewalk districts, bridge improvements, funding for stormwater management or CIP. And finally, facility needs. So currently, last year in the 2022 budget cycle, the building maintenance fund was spun up, and that was $1 million that was taken from SERF as kind of seed money. At this current state, with some of the potentials, the revenues there aren't necessarily adequate to meet needs. You could buy a building with $1 million or even some of the maintenance stuff. I will say that the team is currently working on an asset management plan finances, and so that will help us predetermine what those needs are and what the long-term needs are for the buildings within the city. So that was one of those items that was a little rudimentary, but we wanted to include it in the event council had an appetite to discuss that as part of the reauthorization. So if this were to be potential where the city utilized these funds to purchase, if we were to go into debt, we have to do a separate ballot question to say that we could go into debt for those proceeds. So, and with that, I am going to turn it over to council discussion, direction, and conversation, and answer any questions you may have.
Well, can we start with questions?
Sure, absolutely.
So I'm going to open up for questions of any area, and if you could just reference the page, whatever it is you've got, might have questions on.
I had a question about the debt expense. So we will, according to the information you sent, it sounds like by the end of 2026, we'll have collected enough in funds to pay off the final 2 years of debt that's due on Florida Road.
That's correct. So based on our current projected forecast, yes, that is correct. That we would be able to pay off the rest of that Florida Road. And we could actually do that by the time that sunsets. So let's see.
Right, so we could actually pay it off in the sunset year. You
Yeah.
wouldn't have to wait the next 2 years, because then we could save interest and all that kind of thing.
And I would need to defer to Cynthia for that. I'm not sure if she's in the wings at all, but I would definitely defer for that as far as what the repayment terms are essentially. But yes, by the end of 2026 with our current forecast, we would project about a $2.6 million fund balance, which would cover those two payments that are needed.
And kind of like the sewer bond payment situation, we're recovering interest because we're paying it off early. So maybe that's the case, but we could do that.
Yeah, and we can certainly get more information from that, about what the terms are of the loan.
And if that occurs, what happens to that excess dollars? What happens to the $147,000? Since it's a sales tax and it's.
Right, and that's it, yes, and at this point, since this is a full forecast and projected, I would have to probably defer to Dirk, if we would need to, what we would need to do with that. That ballot language that we have on there, there's some opportunities as it relates to CIP, sidewalks and things of that nature, but I think it would really kind of point back to the ballot language and what Dirk's recommendation and Cynthia's is as far
I don't
as
need
accumulated.
recommendation. I just want us to be thinking about it. So.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Other questions? I have some, but I was, oh, wait.
We
Okay,
do,
go.
if no one else does. Couple things, when you talk about the process, before the ballot question, I wanted to ask about you have a slide up there for citizen input, polling and other outreach. When would that take place, those polling, and I'm assuming you're talking about scientific polling, and that would guide us in this entire process of trying to understand kind of where the community is on some of these issues.
Sure, and I can defer to Kevin since I haven't been here for one of these sales taxes, but if you're willing to.
Well, typically the polling is going to indicate what's going to be successful.
Right.
So you obviously would do that before your hard commitment to a ballot question, because you might even float a couple of sample ballot questions out there. A lot of the survey technology has changed so drastically in the last 5-8 years. So it's not like we're sending out mail surveys anymore. I don't even know if we're doing phone surveys anymore, but there's a lot of ways to get to the answers quickly. But I think that's key to find out what's successful. The other thing that we saw over the years was you may have a range of things that you're interested in. I think this 05, I mean, I was here when we were talking about it in 03, and it started out as just open space. And what happened very quickly is you realize that there was larger community and council interest in other things, but some of them may not have been successful by themselves. So you marry them together. And it really depends on what kind of feedback you get from the community. So you definitely want to do that polling well in advance if you need to have finalization of a ballot question.
Right. I just want to highlight, because for me, that is such a very, very important part of the process before I can give a whole lot of direction on how I think we should move forward. I would be really intrigued and interested in seeing that, and also interested in reviewing with whoever the experts are, the questions that would be being sent out. As I think that's such an important part of the process.
I'd also like to know I know some of the ones that haven't passed, but which ballot questions have failed, which ones have passed, like why?
We took 2 shots at the rec center tax in '99. The first one didn't pass, and the second one did.
But why?
And then I believe just the other year, one of the transportation ones didn't pass.
18 was 18 was question in 18 that failed.
Yeah.
It was a question in 18 that failed, and it came back in 19 and it was approved.
Yeah.
But this one passed first go around. And I think the 15 passed in first go.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah. The 2018, I think, totaled approximately in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
It was for multiple projects. It wasn't just streets.
Other questions?
Well, I noticed that on the, sorry, were you finished?
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
You go ahead.
No, please.
Actually, okay, the polling was the one, because very hard for me to say, even to say, I don't want to look at something until I really get scientifically valid information from our community. But then the other one was, I'm really curious about when we're talking about reauthorization, as far as the timing goes on the next slide of available dates, is how that would potentially tie in with our discussions regarding the library. And so I just don't want to forget that because I know that we're talking about that more actively. About to do a poll for the library. And so if we haven't already, I don't even know where we are with that, but I thought it was gonna happen this summer.
I don't believe we have it at this point. yet.
Okay. And so I think I just want to put that out there for consideration as well.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I think,
To
'cause
kind of
you
figure
have,
those out.
you have the library district, there's possible 2 elections, maybe lodger's tax, that
Right,
might
right.
also be there, so
Good point.
putting a timeframe with some of those other ones definitely probably help in regards to getting together a schedule, so.
Just thinking
Good.
about that.
No, it's good feedback, easier to start off the discussion, have it is to kind of figure out kind of where council is looking at some of the parts that are there to help us come back with a maybe more refined presentation once we get a little bit more feedback, maybe a more dedicated go ahead portion. But when you look at it, one of the reasons to look at it now is again to kind of have maybe 2 shots at it. In case the one shot at the beginning doesn't pass, we have an ability to go back and maybe recraft and go through.
Absolutely.
So I have questions, but I'm opening it up for anybody else.
So to your comment about the poll and the community, I think one of the challenges there is if staff doesn't know what council would be willing to support, it might be hard to develop questions to know what the community wants, because it could be that there's something we absolutely wouldn't support, and it could be something that we totally want to support. So I think it's going to have to be a little bit of a cart before the horse. How do we manage that question? Because I can easily see us, coming up with 8 different things that might be possible to ask the community about, but really only 3 of them are reasonable to ask, or something like that.
And it might be, like, say it was 3, then, and we got to that, but it'll be.
Then there'd be 3.
Yeah, I agree.
Knowing this.
Right, you don't want to just say if you could support anything, what would it be?
Right, exactly, because God knows what we.
Right.
So I also, on the thing that you sent out, Devin, you had the expenses for the Parks and Rec Department in the general fund,
Yes.
and 2022 is projected to be 7.7 million, 7 million.
Are you talking about the ghost projects or the?
I don't know what you sent us. I don't-
Okay,
you
sure,
didn't have a
sorry.
title for it, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Yes.
And we only, so between so the 2015 sales tax generates $5 million, and then the 2005 generates 2.7 million for the post. So is that what that's all coming out of? Is that what we're looking at? The revenue generation from both those sales taxes to basically to the post, or to multimodal and natural land sport, depending on how it's allocated. Because what I'm wondering is, do we have a fund balance in parks and recreation? Because if they're spending $7 million this year, I don't know who else is able to do anything.
Sure, and I would say with transit in 2022, we've had the 3.8 million in grants, which.
No, not transit. I'm talking parks.
Just
and Rec.
Parks and Recreation.
Just that one chart that you sent out. So I just am wondering, we're pretty aggressive with Parks and Rec this year, and the amount of dollars that we're collecting, and it's just a, I don't know, maybe it's informational only.
Well, and for today, on our forecast, we are projecting about a 4.5 fund balance, and I can send that over to council. I think we actually talked forecasts in our session.
Oh, good, excellent.
Too, so that should be a helpful conversation for everyone as well.
And then you also had year-to-date actuals for Parks and Rec. A link to the OpenGov with all the years in it. And in 2019, the general fund, it looks like they subsidized the Parks and Rec Department by $3.6 million. And in 2022 or 2020 by 3.8, and in 2021 by 3.78. And we're already at $2 million now. So it's looking like in excess of $3 million is what the general fund is subsidizing the Parks and Rec in maintenance and operations. And I'm wondering, when we start talking about this, that's one of the things we will want to talk about, because if we re-up the tax to fulfill that subsidy rather than the general fund doing it, that means there would be that $3+ million in the general fund for us to also allocate in a different way that could be more flexible to what we need it for. Or if we wanted to continue subsidizing that and say we took housing and transportation as the thing that got passed by the ballot measure, we would know that we would have that much money every year for the next go to that. So what we're also looking at here isn't just one decision about one thing. It affects multiple budgets and multiple interactions. So I just want to make sure we take all that into account and we're not with blinders on, that we're seeing how it affects all the other things that we're considering.
So I'll just jump in with a question or three questions, excuse me. So first of all, I think the forecasting is really essential, because what we saw with the funding for the sewer fund is we actually ended up with more money that we bonded for than what we needed, because the revenue was higher. So I think it's really important to have an aggressive but predictable, if we can, forecast for what that money would be, because it's possible, you could have it go to 2026, or you could actually, if the revenue was greater, you might be able to retire the debt even sooner and be available to use that. So I think when we go into that forecasting, I have a couple of things on the parks and open spaces. It would say, after the tax, there would be no dedicated sales tax for annual parks, trails, and recreational facilities. I think it's important to point out that would be, you would have access from the 2015 money for those purposes. So I want to make certain that that's not, oh, we don't have any money to take care of this. Yes, you do. You have it from the 2015, which would go on. And then I was struck by the deficit of $925,000 for public transportation, and grants are always gravy. So what would be the plan to cover that if we're not using something? How I'm putting Sarah on the spot, but and I want to point out that that's a deficit. And then if you were going to do additional things like reduce the wait time or other routes or other places till a post or other things, that would be beyond. So the first order would be to cover any deficit.
Right. And this is kind of our gloomy day scenario here. This is current conditions, and we have going into the future, we're locked in at about $880,000 in federal grants. And then the lodger's tax is included in that, about $500,000. Fare box revenue, we generate about $160, and then contracts about $100. So that's where we are currently with our revenue. We were really successful with these COVID relief awards that are going to get us through at our current operating level with those 2 new expanded routes until 2024. So, there are some other opportunities that we can pursue with CDOT. They have some opportunities for expansion grants and things of that nature. Like you said, we don't necessarily want to rely on that.
Grants
We
are
know
great.
that one of the strategic plan goals is to identify a sustainable long-term source of funding for transit. So that's why we kind of threw it out here for this. But we are continually looking for opportunities to solve the problem sustainably. So I don't have an answer for what we will do if we.
No, I think
if we don't have
we
this.
as a council, I'm putting it out there so that we as a council recognize that there is a cliff and it is coming.
And to both your points, back when I was on the multimodal board made recommendations to the city council of how to provide a long-term funding stream for the transportation department, and the council did not look at any of them. They just said no. So you might want to go back and see if there's anything that's still applicable from that conversation that you might want to bring. And then also to the idea of interactions, like with lodger's tax. Right now, the lodger's tax is producing about 1/5 of your total budget. And so when we talk about lodger's tax, do we want that to be 75% of the transportation budget? Do we want it to be less than 1/5? What do we, what do we want?
And I'm looking at, to Councilor Boswell's point earlier about, La Posta, making certain that it's accessible, or Three Springs connected.
that requires more than what you put in here.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm trying to make certain that I would at least expressing that there's significant need. Let me open up to.
Yeah, I think it was great that we did that vision exercise, just like Scott said before, because I keep going back to those three, like vision, like the quality of life, housing, and job growth. And also hearing that we're lacking people in their 20s here. And what is our focus to getting that population back here? And I think back to when I was 20 and I moved to Durango, and why I moved here and why I started my family here, and thinking of those things. I don't think any one of us says like, you know, what housing is important, or trans, like it's all important, 100%. And it's just figuring out how we fund it. And that's what is tricky. It's so challenging because I mean, housing is super important to me. Transportation is super important to me. There's clear deficits, but I look at that parks, open space and trails, and I know we also have the 2015, but that is why I moved here, 100%. Like I can and 100% say that, and I didn't buy a house until 2 years ago. So like I moved here for those amenities and for mountain biking and for like raising my kids here in the school, you know. And so it's like, I don't want, like, what are we losing if we say, okay, parks and open space and trails, like you need to figure it out with the 2015 or in general fund, like we got to figure out new ways, like what are we losing? And so I guess some questions are, how much have we spent on open space acquisition over the last like 5 years? I know we just had that one that we approved recently up by Horse Gulch, but how much did we spend for that one, right? And is that?
No, that was Durango Mesa.
Durango
The
Mesa.
one that we're talking about now is 400 and some odd thousand, the one that.
Okay,
Or you're talking about the one we're currently.
yes, yeah.
That's 400.
Okay, and so I mean, I don't know, I'm struggling because yes, like, I don't want to lose our transportation. I think that it's super important, and I feel, but can we, you know, renegotiate lodger's tax and maybe have a little bit more go there, or I don't know, we need to fund it all. Figure it out, okay, thank you, I'm done.
Sales tax election.
I'm just kidding.
Olivier.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Maybe the first one is, if a ballot takes place, when would the change take effect? Would that be December 31st, 2026, or shortly after the ballot?
It would be according to how council decides to do it. In 2015, when the 99 was renewed, that was renewed for a specific period of time. So the renewal date and a new sunset date, if you wanted to put one on it, would be entirely up to council and how you wanted to do that. So, I mean, you could continue it. You'd have a variety of options. You could continue the current situation until a certain time and then it switch. So it's really up to council to decide that.
So, and that answers pretty much my second question. If it would be for another 20-year term or a permanent one, that's just a matter of how we word it.
That would be up to council to decide whether you wanted to put a sunset on it or not, right?
I think on my hearing the other council's comments, I agree that getting feedback from SALFAT and citizens' input is extremely important. I assume it would be beneficial for them as well as council to have a better understanding of finances and forecasts. And specifically, like, what do we have in the pipeline for the next 10, 20 years, or even far-fetched anticipated spending, so that we have some, it's not factual, but it is some sort of quantification of how much money is needed for different purposes. Without that, for me, it's very difficult to say, just to get as good as possible. And even going back the last 5 years, I completely agree with that. So for me, that would be the first step. But, and I think SALFAT only ask the same question if we then, and if they don't, then I think we should just provide that information first as far as we can.
Yeah, in the August 2nd meeting, we will be talking about forecast with SALFAT. So that'll be similar cadence to when council is seeing this as well. So I think that'll be helpful. And most of the departments have, and I know Parks and Rec has a your plan and goes pretty far out on both taxes, doesn't it?
We have it projected right now for 5 years is what we typically do, but we do have a whole laundry list.
And just so you know, the Parks and Rec, master plan has a big list. I think for your department, it's a little bit easier, but you put some numbers in there. Housing is a bit more vague, but I think have some opportunity there, even though that would be financed through TIF financing. So yeah, I'm thinking if you're posted. But anyway, yeah. Financial numbers for, I think, 5 years, I think it's gonna make changes in the ballot, and let's try and look.
It's in for the 15 and the 05, I believe we have those through 20. So.
I'd like to follow up on Olivier's comment on a different, in the sense of the planning. I'm gonna put Jose on the spot. We're using ARPA money for housing now. Where do you see the funding coming from? And if you're gonna have to take it from the general fund, what's gonna have to give? Other than we're just gonna have so much more sales tax that we don't know what to do with it.
Well, I wouldn't say that. The last part of it, I definitely wouldn't go there. We are in the middle of a budget process, so we're very much aware that the housing division funding with ARPA funds is 2 years. So definitely have to take a look at that and understand that we need to have a plan bringing it in. Naturally, no matter what ends up happening, probably would love to keep the housing innovation department. It's definitely a core service, so it would naturally transition to the general fund. What has to give, I couldn't tell you that right now. It's just conversations that I'm going to have with Devin and finance as we continue to move forward in our budget process. And so that would definitely be a discussion point in our budget, is talking about, okay, what are we seeing as these, not only for what we're seeing this year, but what are we looking at those future challenges and how are we beginning to prepare for those?
And the way I'm going with that is, without going to the kitchen sink, which we did in like 2018, we have other facility needs that are going to need to be addressed at police station, other facilities, and there's no inclusion of that in this. Maybe it doesn't make sense, I don't know, but did I miss that?
Facility needs was the last.
Was it the
slide.
last page? Did you? I'm sorry.
But to your point on the police.
Yeah, but basically, yeah, it wasn't specific enough.
We kept it vague because
Yeah.
we didn't know. We just know there is going to be facility needs, whether it's a PD joint building, whether it's a different building, we have to move out. If we end up transferring somehow River City Hall, there's just some things that are going through it. And that's why we actually kind of put facility needs. If there's something out there like, hey, we know we're going to have some needs on there, but then we also have some maintenance needs, and that could be an option that we could use a dedicated source of funding for. That's always kind of replenishing those parts of it.
I think the good news is we have 4.5 years and 4 opportunities for the balance. So as long as we slowly start that process. Because,
No, I'm not interrupting you. You paused and I think that you're done.
I think one key thing that we're maybe missing or not bringing up is I expect there will be some economic challenges in the next years that might really impact priorities with the inflation, cost of everything. So yeah.
That's why we have that sales tax model for those. So it'd be good to see kind of what they're taking a look at, and definitely will be part of our process as we look through is what are we expecting with the sales tax and how's that affecting us right now. Devin's continuously taking a look at it, preparing ourselves that if there is a recession that happens to come, conservatively, fiscally responsible with our funding so that we don't get placed in a situation where we're overspending and we don't have enough to be able to continue the core services that we provide.
I don't think that we're like immune to like what everyone is going through. And I feel like transportation and housing especially is being felt by lots of communities. Is there any legislation coming up or more grant opportunities or funding and stuff for at least, I mean, those two seem huge to get more.
Housing, big one for housing. That might be on the ballot in November of this year, 2023, for possible, I think they were suggesting November of this year.
Okay.
$200, $300 million bucket for housing potentially. And I'll be discussing this a lot more at our retreat here coming up here. CML this weekend, but that's a big one for us for housing.
I think it would be useful for the 2005 to actually get a summary of what we've done with that money. I mean, in the sense of, we've built the library and blah, blah, this, but what we've done particularly with the parks and open space, not just the past 5 years, because that's been around for, it'll be close to 20 years.
We have spreadsheets that account for.
Yeah, so I
every
think we
every
all,
project.
I think we all need
Yeah.
to see what was accomplished
Absolutely.
with it. And then I go back to the question raised at one of the retreats. Do we put as much into making this a livable town as to making it a town that is the reason people come? Because if we want people to stay, they have to have a place to live. And what is that balance between the things that draw different people here, whether that's the arts or the mountain biking, whether, and them having a place to live and a way to get to and from that doesn't require cars.
It's a really good question. And I think that I'm really anxious to hear from the polling if the community would support that. Because I felt like in our retreat, we supported it as a council. We understand the value of trying to get people to stay and having an affordable place to stay, but
I also
to
feel
follow
like
up on that.
there's more opportunity for funding from other sources for housing and transportation than there is for facility, that sort of stuff. So just finding that balance of where we're getting the money from for these all important things.
Right. I would just add, I really think that you guys have hit on some good topics. I wouldn't take any of these
I
out
know.
at this point. I think that I was glad to see you added facility needs to this, and it will be interesting. Because that's a complex one, because in the kitchen sink in 2018, the police department was front and center. That was front and center of the needs. And so, but if that's handled with the 9R, I just, we're kind of in flux with that. And then we still have City Hall to address, but, so anyway, I think that you've hit on the top level priorities, I think, that need to be kind of sorted out.
I think actually the police department suffered through that. Because I think if you had just narrowed it down, we're gonna do this for a police department, or we're gonna do this for this building first, and then we're gonna look at it as a period. Because I think being too general resulted in the failure of that vote by an overwhelming majority. Whereas if we had narrowed it, that's why when I saw that, it was like, well, that's all encompassing. It's not something people could say, wow, yes, of course we need to do that.
And we don't, say we think that housing and transportation is incredibly important. It could be 3/4 of it that goes to that, and the other 25% goes to Parks and Rec. So it's not an all or nothing. And I think that's where the biggest challenge probably comes in, is what's the right mix to achieve what we want to achieve?
And I guess also what's outstanding in that thing, not that they're the $200 million of what ifs, all the things we want, but what are the big projects that are still outstanding that we need to ensure there's the funding to take care of them as you take that to the voters.
And I agree with you about the balance, obviously, because I've said it many times about the balance of housing and the amenities. Because the amenities are what create an expensive, although lovely, wonderful place to be. But without the housing, then it's second homeowners and visitors who are reaping the benefits, not the community that we'd like to have.
Jose, have we been sufficiently general?
Sufficiently provided good feedback. I know Devin has written those down, so we still have the SALT meeting. We'll continue to move this forward and bring it back as we continue to get more of those information for you, forecast information, some of this data, and bring it back to the council. Refresh.
I am curious, going back to Melissa's first question on community input. What do you envision, like this kind of involving or communicating with the different advisory boards regarding what we're doing in our thinking?
I think that's still going to be part of the process of moving forward yet. I would envision that we would encapsulate their comments in their field, but don't really have a specific plan yet on that side. I think we're still kind of at the step one and something that we'll have to develop as we go through this process.
Well, you also said fairly recently that we didn't want the boards to be out in front of what council would like to be doing. So
Exactly.
that's also challenging around that because, of course, they're going to want to get all enthusiastic and figure out the best use from their perspective of it. So,
Absolutely.
I guess that's where I was trying to go with, how does council set that priority? And even though we have our individual liaison roles.
I think that what I would look at in regards to at least the priorities is we now have a meeting that we can point back to the council to discuss. And we're in that process, we're actively having those discussions. And so until the council has an ability to get to a point, I think there's comfortability of beginning to go out to the public or beginning to go to the commissions. They should wait until the council has found their comfortability level and receive the information that you need.
Well, I think that's important, especially since we have several staff members here who work with their different boards and commissions as well. So I think we're working on it and we're still prioritizing and taking feedback, but we are, as a council, moving forward. Any other thoughts on this?
I'm just confused what our next steps are regarding this topic. How are we proceeding forward?
So there's still salt map that is a conjunction that we will talk about. We heard forecasts, which we're also working on.
Okay.
So there's still pieces of information
You're gonna get to
that
us.
we still need to go back and we will follow back up probably in the next month and a half.
And then
with
we'll
kind of a little
have
bit-
another study session shortly thereafter.
Talk a little bit about where we're
Okay.
at, things that we're going through, maybe develop a little bit more of a time frame or
Okay.
timeline that possibly could happen. It's still rough, it still needs changed. Probably look a little bit more about what does citizen engagement look like?
Great.
What are some of the options to use? And just begins to formulate more and more as we go.
And I would also comment that if Allison were in town, I think she's on holiday right now, she probably would have also been at the table to make the case for stormwater.
And I think
Treatment.
she might be connected.
Okay.
Keith is quiet.
Oh, there's Keith. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you. I didn't realize that you were filling in for her. My apologies. I would have invited you up here.
No, it's okay. Devin had kind of covered that a little bit, so. Rest of the others. And approaching, seeing what the temperature is. As one of the obviously, like Chris said.
Right. So even though we didn't discuss that topic as well, it's still on the table.
Yes. For me, the timeline is very short, what you're providing there. I see, it makes almost more sense to push it out a little bit further, to give you more time, because you have so much on your plate and different high priority projects. And some of these projects we have to tackle, so.
Appreciate that.
yeah, and we don't have 4.5. The same time as the election would take place, the last
There's a
election.
schedule.
2026, now, I understand. So, but the tax ends on 2026, and we don't want to come to the last one, what's the last one there?
April 2023,
Yeah, so 2025.
2025.
So we don't want to come to 2025 necessarily and lose that election. So we have to be really, really careful how we look at what our timing actually is.
And I guess I will say I was really struck, and Melissa was on council there, when we did a lot of community engagement, there was a scientifically valid study, which depends on what questions you lead with, that said that huge tax would pass, and it didn't. So then we had to come back on a more narrow, just about the streets, and bring that back, so that there's a value in having a backup plan, should it not be.
Well, I'll say one of the failings maybe of that study was it was just a general.
Yeah.
It wasn't registered voters. And so that's a different subset of people. So you can get a lot of people who don't even vote and they're not registered voters telling you all these sorts of things, but
How come November of 2025 is not on here? Is that not an option?
I'm sorry.
It is an option, but it would be an option.
Okay, so it's also an option.
Yeah.
okay.
I'm wondering about that.
Not November's aren't good times, but.
So back to Jose, you feel you have enough sense, you're gonna follow through. We will be getting the forecasting that plans for consumption and also plans for a potential recession. So that looks at that. And staff will keep coming back. I think the one takeaway was to give us the accomplishments of what had been done with the 2005.
Sure.
Particularly the post money.
I think we can pull it together, and then I know we had asked, some questions around what had tax or what had failed, so we can kind of pull some of that information together.
And then the other thing that was discussed is how does this fit in with lodger's tax, with the a possible library district, and any other bonding that we may need to do, whether it's for water. How does that all line up?
And I think the forecast will be really helpful because you're looking at those, you can see the planned projects and you can see where we do have revenues or what our, expectations are for those, and where some of those things just. And so I think that's somewhat helpful for this conversation, as you mentioned, to see where the needs are throughout each month.
My concern is we could go to April 2023, and while I want to have those opportunities to have a backup plan, we could also have multiple votes for various projects that are
Multiple questions. you mean?
multiple ballot.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
That's what I think you're right.
Right, library district
We'll
or,
for sure
yeah.
have lodger's tax, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, so
So that's the concern, is that,
Yeah,
how does that fit?
that's
too?
exactly right. Might have to wait a little bit. And one more question let's just suggest looking at April 2023. I think I'm trying to remember, is it September that you have to have your ballot question into the county or something?
It wouldn't be quite that early. It would probably, I would say if you want to plan to have it in 3 months, I mean, I think that's 3 to 4 months ahead of time would be,
Is that it? Okay.
For the 2019, it was January or February.
yeah,
Okay.
it was around the first of the year when we
Okay.
did the last one.
Okay, so we have time. Great.
Earlier the better, of course, but that would be the deadline.
Thank you. I think we have, thank you all for being here, presenting. Dirk, we have 10 minutes with council's permission to extend another 5 to talk about if there's a dissent, please let me know.
I don't really have a formal presentation, just take a second to remind everyone how this item was placed on this study session. Some time ago, Councilor Bosman's asked that we investigate the possibility of having some training on Robert's rules. In the interim, there was some exchange of information regarding some specific portions of Robert's rules, I think that you have, that may be specifically addressing some of the concerns that were raised. So at this point, I guess my question to you is if that's adequate, or if you still want to give guidance to organize some sort of special training on Robert's rules or other processes. So, and unfortunately, I think this one sort of got, because of we all have a lot of things on our plate, so I think this one sort of got left off of the study session earlier, so apologize for that. But bringing it back up now, sort of just to get a check to see how council feels about the information you have and whether you want to schedule some additional training.
I thought that direction was given to staff during that meeting to get training, and I initiated that discussion, but there was a consensus of the majority of council. And I do know there were some emails back and forth afterwards, but at that, to me, I'm not sure if that changed the direction that we're given. So
Yeah, at the next study session, when I believe you and Councilor Youssef were not here, we brought it up again, and the 3 of us agreed, the majority agreed that what we would do is we would ask that question when all of us were here again, because we felt that the information that Dirk had provided us with was probably sufficient, that we didn't need a training. So that's why it came back up to this study session, so that we all 5 of us could talk about that instead of just 3 of us making that decision.
Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah.
So I guess the pointed question is, do you want, you still want to have
some specific training, we could try to arrange that. I mean, I did do some investigation of some folks. I mean, probably all of you, it may have been, well, those of you at CML, met Bob Widener, who drafted Bob's rules, but we could certainly try to find some training if that's something we're interested in.
I personally think the information you sent out about the point of order, and then there's also the point of information, which is also similar. Personally, for me, I think that fulfills, like, we have a mechanism for managing the meetings that we didn't have before. I'm happy with that. I don't feel we need training myself.
Other counselors?
Since I brought it up, the Robert's rules were available and probably provided to everybody over time, many times, including to me. And the reason I brought up the training is to make this council function better, more professional, and have less community feedback, I guess, is one of the consequences, which I tend to get on impressions that people in our community get when they watch or hear council meetings. So my personal opinion is that reminder training will never hurt.
Other counselors?
In the original meeting, I wasn't really supportive of a training, more so as like maybe a refresher, because I had done a training right when I got elected, and I thought that I understood it. I felt like the rules of order and like the points of information and the points of procedure, point of order was super helpful, because I can see how that would help keep us on task and on point and not get maybe veering off topic, where I think a lot of the maybe negativity you're hearing about happens if we can make the point of order quickly and efficiently. And so I am fine, and I honestly I want another meeting for something that I think if we're civil and we listen to each other and we do the points of order as we should, I think I can handle it. That.
Right.
I really support council in what they would want to do with this. I would support the majority of council. If council wanted to meet, I would make myself available. I agree, having productive meetings is great, and effective and efficient cordial meetings is great. And if council thought that would help us get there by taking an hour or two, I would definitely invest in the time, because I think it's important. But I also, I personally feel comfortable, I'm just reviewing this myself. But I had brought it up before as well, like, maybe a review is good. So maybe we just, if we find ourselves feeling frustrated or not heard or not represented well, or not having opportunity to get our questions answered and or asked, then we bring this back up again. I don't know. I want council to feel supported.
So I'll jump in that I actually don't think it's necessary to bring in someone to do any kind of training. I think it's in our advisory board handbook. I think it's there. I think the information, Dirk, that you provided was useful. I do think that there will be times when we'll look to the city attorney to say, because out of all of us, you are probably the closest to understanding it. So there may be an occasion where we might need to say, city attorney, what do you think? But I think that we can handle this with all of us looking at what's the point of order and what's the point of information. And when a point of order is made, then moving on. I mean, it's accepting that the point is that you're discussing something that is out of order, accepting it and moving on. So I'm
to that point, it's actually the person who's managing the meetings, an evaluation of the point of order that's made, and then that evaluation can be overturned by the council. So there is a process for there's a step-by-step process for going through all that. It's not just a random point of order. No, I just want to make that clear to everybody who understands that or who's listening, that's, and you made that really clear, Dirk, which I thought was great, that it is a process. And in reality, we haven't taken advantage of that process. And I'll say that if I had known really how this process worked, 10 months ago, I would have been using it. I think it would have been really, really helpful to offset some of the challenges that Olivier and I have had in meetings. And I'm going to be direct about that I realize that it hasn't been a good thing for us. And so I think this is a really, really basic way to handle it. And it's part of Robert's Rules of Order. And I think we can be successful with it. And if we're not, then we have a conversation again.
I have one more, so the consensus is that we're going forward with our information that we have that you provided us. I have one more thing that I need clarity on, and that is the next meeting, because I just want to point out.
Can we recap? So
Oh,
we're just going forward with points of order and we're not having a training.
right, there's not consensus. So if you look at if you would, council, look at the 719 proposed agenda, I want to remind everyone that we added here a discussion around homelessness. So I'm looking at, is there something we can remove or change? And my first comment to Jose was, this is the schedule. We have added that we have an expectation of at this meeting to also discuss homelessness, as we discussed earlier.
So we're adding more time to the end because it got done at 4:10.
Yeah.
Right, I'm still not certain an extra half hour. My question would be, could the budget and strategic plan update, that be incorporated into a city council meeting rather than into a study session? And would council support that?
Yeah.
Just so we have, I think we're gonna
Full
need
hour.
more than 30 minutes. I think we're gonna need.
Full hour.
So there's support for that?
Yeah.
All right, so you would add that to the proposed agenda for the city council meeting that night. Great. Thank you all. We'll start at 5:30.